Now to the war in Ukraine, where some civilians who were sheltering in that bombed-out steel plant in Mariupol were finally evacuated in a rescue mission many harrowing weeks in the making. What you're watching now is video from these evacuations. It was filmed by the Azov Battalion reportedly over the weekend. NBC News has not been able to verify any of the footage, but the footage does back up reporting about the conditions faced by the Ukrainians who have been left behind, who remain alive in the eastern city of Mariupol. Officials believe up to 1,000 people have been sheltering in the Azovstal steel plant, which continues to come under brutal, relentless attack by Russian troops. According to Ukraine's military police, more than 100 civilians evacuated arrived in Zaporizhia earlier today. It's unclear whether hundreds more civilians and soldiers will be able to get out as talks between Russia and Ukraine appear to be even more fraught today. Amid all this tension, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi led a small Democratic delegation on a surprise visit to Kyiv over the weekend, reaffirming the United States' support for Ukraine. Let's bring into our coverage NBC News correspondent Cal Perry, who's reporting on the ground in Kyiv. Also joining us, Ben Rhodes, former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Obama, also an MSNBC contributor. Cal, tell me the impact. I know the message from the Ukrainians now is Kyiv is safe. Come to Kyiv. Tell me the impact of having what amounts to the most senior U.S. official to visit Kyiv since the war began.
Well, look, I think that helps. I think that helps with the messaging that Kyiv is generally safe. We did have airstrikes sort of 72 hours, 48 hours before that visit by Nancy Pelosi, which I think rattled folks here a little bit because it had been 10 days since we had had those airstrikes. But you have really the symbolic nature of the visit, and then you have the sort of very legitimate need that the Ukrainian government has for weapons. It was interesting on the sort of post-press conferences that we saw there in Poland after these individuals had left the country. There was specific talk about exactly the kind of weapons that were needed here in Ukraine. So, example, more talk about those howitzers. And all of this, I think, Nicole, really is the backdrop for Mariupol, right? Mariupol has become the center of attention here in Ukraine. It has become the center of attention in many ways around the world because of this conflict here. And what we're seeing now in the evacuation of these civilians is not just, I think, in many ways to reinforce what the Ukrainian government is saying about needing these weapons, but we're starting to hear the stories of how people are surviving, how people are tapping into their radiators to get water, how children are running out in the rain to find water and then coming under shelling. I say all of this as a way of talking about we're going to lose these stories. If the Russians take this steel plant, and we should say our colleague Kelly Cobier is saying there are 100,000 civilians still bedded down in this country. If the Russians take this steel plant, if they encircle this city, if they kill everybody in this city, we're going to lose the stories of survival. We're going to lose the eyewitness reports of atrocities. It is something that I think the government here is worried more and more about. They're talking more and more about crematoriums they believe the Russians are using to burn bodies in the streets. We cannot independently confirm that. But it all goes to show you that people here are worried again about the atrocities being covered up. It is not just Mariupol. Kharkiv, we saw fresh shelling today. At least 3 people killed, another 8 wounded. Odessa, there was a rocket attack today that killed a 13-year-old child and wounded 8 others. So the backdrop to the meeting with Nancy Pelosi is, again, a meeting in which you have the president of Ukraine, I think, very appreciative that the symbolic nature of these visits is being seen around the world. This is the highest-ranking politician in the U.S. to come here. But an ask, again, for more and more weapons. Now, we've already had $33 billion worth of military aid come into this country, but according to the Ukrainian president, it's not enough. The last thing I'll leave you with, Nicole, this is something we talked about last week. There are more and more explosions now on the Russian side of the border. There have been a series of explosions in Belgrade on industrial complexes, that is fuel that the Russians use to resupply their lines. We have seen an increased attack from Russians in Ukraine on the fuel supply in this country. And so now in the capital here, while again it is safe, there are fuel lines here. Fuel is becoming harder and harder to get. It is starting to limit what both the Ukrainian military can do and what humanitarian groups can do. So this war is dragging on. It doesn't seem like there's any let up and the violence continues, Nicole.
Ben, because Cal isn't just the best of NBC, but he's also poetic here. I mean, he was describing that line from Hamilton, who lives, who dies, who tells your story. I mean, this is so central to President Zelensky's ability to lead his country right now. And literally, who lives and who dies will shape whether or not this story of the atrocities is told at a time when he has an ask on the table to this White House that they designate Russia as a state sponsor of terror. Jim Himes reported on this program that Nancy Pelosi is very open and sees, reason and cause for that. I wonder your thoughts on her trip and on that designation of Russia as a state sponsor of terror, Ben.
Well, I think the first thing I'd add to what Cal said, which I totally agree with about the trip, is that we're moving into a new phase of this war where it's evident that both the Ukrainian government and Western allies are preparing for a long haul here. So when you look at the $33 billion package that was discussed, that's multi-month sustainment of Ukrainian forces, as well as trying to get them things like heavy weapons, howitzers that can allow them to go on offense in a kind of grinded, protracted conflict in the Donbass region. When you look at the Europeans preparing to phase off Russian gas over a period of months, all this points to a picture where we're thinking in terms of 6 months to a year, in part because of the nature of the fighting, in part because when Russia is making deals and then shelling civilians who are trying to get out under those deals of evacuation in places like Mariupol, how are you ever going to trust these people to sign a peace deal? Like, that's clearly not happening in the near future. So my big takeaway is that we're in for a long-term haul here. And the state sponsor of terrorism designation should certainly be on the table. We've designated states, Nicole, for much less than what Russia's doing in terms of sponsorship of violence. And with Russia, it's not just their military, it's all these kind of paramilitary proxies that they use as well. If we do take that step, it's yet another signal that the remaining ties between Russia and the United States and the West are being cut.